Good morning and welcome to our live talk program. This is Lloyd Grubb here, your host on Revive Reform Radio, doing our live talk program covering current events, dealing with the current events that's going on in our society as we speak. And this morning, our current event topic is looking at the rich skimming too much cream off the top. The rich skimming too much cream off the top is our talk for this morning here as we do our live talk program covering current events. So, welcome to our live talk program and top of the morning to you. Hopefully, you had a blessed night rest and you're ready to take on this day, the day that the Lord has given you. We'll begin with a short prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, we thank thee again, dear Lord, for your blessings. We thank you, dear Father, for your leading in our lives and for the wisdom that you give us from your word. I pray that you may bless us as we see things, dear Lord, happening in our nation, in our society, that we might understand and we might choose the best path. May you bless us, dear Lord, for Christ's sake. Amen. So again, our topic again for this morning here is the rich skimming too much cream off the top. The rich skimming too much cream off the top as we look at our current events and what's currently going on in the nation. And I might introduce this by, I'm introducing this by just noting that yesterday there was a major shooting in Washington, D.C., and it was some politician that got shot. And the motivation, it seems, on the surface, without any further investigation, is that it's something to do with the shooter upset about the current state of the political affairs in the United States. And so for that, I want to talk about the basic underlying, on the surface, reasoning for that. And that we have to watch this development because as we move forward and we see the motivation primarily is a motivation to try to enrich a few at the hurt of the majority, of the hurt of the majority. And this is the move in the political system right now. And it doesn't matter what party we're in. If the Democrats are in charge or the Republicans are in charge, the principles more or less are the same. If you understand what you're looking at, and as I go through this morning, I'll show you what's really happening, and that there is a problem developing in the world where there's a gap that is widening between the few at the top and the majority at the bottom. And as that gap widens, what we'll see is this type of outburst of violence until it becomes a full-scale destruction. Because what it is that the poor normally don't have, and because of sin, they're normally covetous for what others have. And the rich are greedy and they can't be controlled. So what will simply happen is that when this kind of constant policies are put in place by the rich, which normally is represented by the United States Senate, they normally put in place this type of wealth distribution to make the money and all the cream, so to speak, as I say, stay at the top. And as the cream stay at the top, then you have that the rich are getting so much richer and the poor has to live on basic means. This normally will foment violence. And so we want to talk about this morning here and want to put this forward and put this type of line of reasoning. And what you will see here that will develop as I talk about this is that you'll see that it doesn't matter what your opinion, it doesn't matter what, say, for instance, a senator who normally is a multimillionaire or represent multimillionaires, or it doesn't matter what the poor people think. The reality is that the more you squeeze those at the bottom, is the more you leave people to become desperate. So one has to watch this. So we begin this morning by reading Proverbs chapter 5, verse 22. And it says, his own iniquity shall take the wicked himself, and he shall behold them with the cord of his sin. So he shall behold them with the cord of his sin. Now, greed is something that is always a problem. Greed is something that we all have to deal with in ourselves. The problem is when you put people who are not truly beholden to the masses, but they're primarily beholden to the multimillionaires and billionaires in our society to make the laws. Greed caused them to put forward laws that are unfair and will continue to skim off the top. We saw this primarily in 2008, that after the financial crash, which was created by the banksters and the rich in Wall Street and by the political elite across America, we saw how quickly that rules were put in place to make the rich become richer, that the people who really benefit from the 2008 financial crash, 2007, 2008, because it really started in 2007, were the multi-billionaires and millionaires of this society. The rules were put in place banking wise that not didn't curtail them but continue making them massive financial wealth. And those who were hurt primarily were those at the bottom. And I give you an example. You have a person save up $10,000 and they go and they pay for closing costs and deposit to buy a little house for themselves. They bought this house and now the financial system went that was rigged to make the rich richer, to skim more fat off the top. After that happened, what simply they did is they did bailouts for the multimillionaires and billionaires. And the poor didn't get in a bailout. So the bailout was for the rich and not for the poor. But the poor now, somebody would say, well, he bought more than he can. Well, he was trying to buy what he could. So now he buys that property, he loses that $10,000 plus whatever principal he was paying on the mortgage. And that's all the money he has. So somebody will say, well, who cares about him? We need to put money in the hands of the rich. And that goes to some of what I want to talk about for the rest of the time. How the laws are set in place that the rich always move forward. And what will end up happening because of this, which I am putting forward here, it will continue. I will see more bloodshed in the nation as it gets tighter and the rich skim more. Now I'll read for you Revelation chapter 18, verse 2 and 3. And you'll see in Revelation 18, verse 2 or 3, that there's a focus in the Bible that deals with this idea of the rich in bed with even the churches. Look at this here. This is speaking about the fallen churches in the last days, if you understand prophecy. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become a habitation of devils, and the hole of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacy. Now, I want you to think about this here. Here the Bible is describing in the last days that one of the major problems that will be happening is that the church, the corrupt churches, will be in bed with the corrupt politicians and leaders of various different countries to enrich themselves. The problem that we have in the society is the same problem we have in the church. The church is all about money. The mainline church, the big mega church, all they preach about, you go on the TV, you hear them talk about get rich, get rich, get rich. And the pastors are living phenomenally wealthy, and the members are not doing well. Then you have in the society have the same idea. One of the ways that they describe it is called trickle-down theory. You take all the tax money that you can take, and you structure businesses and contracts by the government to make sure that the rich always get their hand in the cookie jar. And so the rich is just constantly skimming off the top and taking more than they should, and they're not giving back enough. And they keep saying we work for the money, but they know they're buying politicians off to basically get rules and laws and contracts in their favors. So what happened is that you have the same problem that's going on in the world is the same problem going on in the church. It's just it's the different side of the same coin. So anyhow, so you have this thing going on here, and what it is that the both groups are in bed. So normally you'll find that when these things happening, at least the church is supposed to be in a position from a religious point of view to say what you're doing is immoral. It might be legal, but it's immoral and it will end bad. So again, for all the nations who have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, the concept of the wine is basically something that you drink. In today's world, we say people drink the Kool-Aid, from the killing that happened or the suicide that happened in South America by these religious people and say, oh, they drank the Kool-Aid. But in the Bible has used that concept. The Bible uses the concept of wine. You're drinking something that's making you drunk. And what we have is that from in the church and in the political or the kingly part, the rulership part of our nation, the civil part, and the various nations around the world, they have all drunk this wine that a few men at the top should take all the cream and all the gravy off for themselves and leave the rest of the people without enough to live on, or just enough so that they don't starve. This is one of the false concepts that has been put forward by the churches, and the churches are, as I say, embroiled and embedded in this theory. Because if you look at what's going on in the churches today, you can see that the churches, all they talk about is money. And I have people that I know personally that ever since they've joined certain churches, all they talk about is just rich and that God is blessing them so that they can live large. So when you look at it, they've drank this wine, and this wine has resulted in them joining up with a merchant class, and they're living rich. The earth, it says the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacy. The church is in bed with the financial people, and they're all peas in a pod. That's why if you look in many churches, you see that you are automatically put at the head of the church if you are a multimillionaire, if you are very rich. You automatically get a place at the board. You automatically get a say. So your money buys you the power. Your money buys you the position in the church. And that's the problem that's going on, where if you look in the church, the money buys your place at the board and in leadership. But if you look in the society, money is what buy laws and buy contracts. You look in the society, a person that's running for Congress will become a multimillionaire in no time. The person that's in Senate is always a multimillionaire. They represent the rich. The Congress represent the rest of the society, and the Senate represent the rich. Right now, what you have is that those who are representing the rich are almost totally in charge. And what you will have is that they'll pass rules and laws that will make sure that they pay less tax, and they sold the society on this false wine that if the rich pay less tax, then they will benefit the society. It's good for society. And they're writing laws and rules and overturning things that make sure that there's no proper redistribution of wealth. So I'll use that term because since many Americans, especially who are conservative white male, don't like that term, I use that term. The redistribution of wealth is something that they hate. They want to be able to constantly hoard money. So they make money, but they never give back. But in order for a rich person to make money, as you know, they have to have tax dollars being spent in their way. We saw that in 2008 for the financial crash. The rich was bailed out. We saw that in order for you to build a stadium, to build a high-rise building, to build major factories, you need infrastructure. You need the people's tax, the poor people tax money, and middle-class tax money used to build your infrastructure so you can make money. But when it's time for them to pay back taxes, they say, no way, we ain't doing that. We want to hoard the money and keep it in banks. So the Bible deals with all this, and we're going to continue to deal with this. So they have waxed rich. But the problem with waxing rich like this is that it's not going to continue this way. Because the problem is the more you squeeze the poor, you make desperate people. And desperate people do strange things. But the greed of the rich is blinding. And so this is what our topic is. The rich skimming too much cream off the top. Now, in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6 through 10. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6 through 10. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, let us be therewith content. But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which draw men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some covet after, they have erred from the faith, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. So here we have this problem, the love of money. The Bible says this is the root of all evil. And when we see that there is almost enshrined, number one, we live in a country that is a capitalist country. So the concept of America is that, you capitalize as much as you can. But the problem with capitalize as much as you can is that there's a point where it can get out of control. We saw this idea here in France. When we think about the French Revolution, what was the French Revolution? The French Revolution was a revolution or a uprising against those who just took too much. And they take and take and take and left the poor in very terrible conditions. And they did not care about the poor. They were actually proud against the poor. And that pride against the poor became a pain and a hurt to them. It became their own downfall. And as we look at the history of France and we look at how France developed, we can see that right now the world is a philosophy of let's capitalize and take everything that we possibly can from those who are at the bottom. And let's just leave them with little. And as this continues, what we'll see is that more and more there will be uprising, not just here, but all across the United States. All across the world. So bear that in mind, and for certain, you will see this become more and more because you can't skim off the top. Now, one more thing that I mentioned here about the French Revolution that I think is important to always note in discussions like this, because their history is certainly being repeated in various different countries across the world, is that when you look at the French Revolution and you look at what happened, it can be very clearly seen and basically demonstrated that a large percentage or a large part of the Catholic Church, primarily the religious elite in France, were beheaded. They were beheaded by thousands. Nuns and priests were just having their head being chopped off. Because similar to what's going on in America right now with the mainline Protestant churches, you found that the Catholics had created the same type of system where they and the merchant class and the royalties live lavish lives. And it was their right to live lavish lives, while the poor did not get back a proper amount. And they basically say that it was their right. And today you see the same reality. Whether people like the concept or not, that's just the reality. You look at it. Is they're saying basically, we work for it. What we work for? What are they working for? What are they talking about? So as they build up this large reserves of money and they're not willing to give back enough taxes to offset and to help, make people have jobs and so forth, what you find is that more and more you see that there's going to be a hate against that class. So we see this here. The pastors over here, religious elite, living large, and they're not being affected by the wants and the needs of the people. Then you see the merchant class and the rulership. Today we'll say our political people are like kings and queens and dukes and duchesses. They live large. As I say, if you make it into Congress, somebody say, why would a person spend millions and millions of dollars just to be a Congress person? Because they're going to make millions and millions of dollars. This is the type of thing that will happen. So if you look at this there, you'll see this very clear. It will develop. What happened in France back in the past will be repeated in the United States and in various different countries, because the same concepts, the same false ideas are at work. And these false ideas are that if you have a person that's mining or drilling, they basically say they are the one that earn the money and they don't need to give back, even though they never put the oil there, never put none of the minerals there, the coal there. And so they don't think they owe the society any money. And it might be so. It's their money. They can do what they have to do with it, and they can pay millions of dollars to the senators and the Congress people to make sure write laws to keep their taxes very low, that they pay almost sometimes no taxes. As you know, some of these big corporations don't pay taxes because they get to write off everything. And they keep all the money in their pocket. But how is that doing good for them? And so they're going to have to use a lot of this money building bunkers, because that's what's going to happen. So this is why the Bible warns against this and warns the rich. Don't be so greedy. Don't be so greedy. All good gifts coming from the Lord. Although we know most of these people don't believe in God, they believe in the devil and our evolution. So we keep reading here. So again, as we look at the rich skimming too much cream off the top, it will become their downfall or the downfall of our society. I'm reading this quotation here from 5 Manuscript, page 305. And basically, this is written by Ellen G. White, written about 100 years ago. And she's describing a situation. And as I read this, I want you to think about this and how it is describing what's going on in the nation and in the world right now. And this can be applied to today, although it was written 100 years ago. It says, there are men in the church and in the world who have educated themselves to practice fraud, and for this they will be brought into judgment. Men have chosen to stand not under the bloodstained banner of Prince Emmanuel, but under the rebel flag to do the works of a rebellious prince. They may have sold their soul for money. They may have taken their Lord's money to purchase wheat and the facilities whereby poor men live, that they may extort from the Lord's creatures the highest price. They make for themselves princely fortune. As a matter of fact, what you just hear described here is how basically things like the stock market and mercantile exchange. You'll have people starving who are, growing the coffee, growing the wheat. The person who are doing the farming sometimes don't have enough to live on. But the person who is at the Wall Street level and at the mercantile exchange level, they have more than enough to live on. So they're just skimming off the top while the person who is a producer can't get enough. And this was not always the case in America. They were, in the time of Abraham Lincoln and so forth, they wanted to put protections for the person who is a producer and not let the person who is a person that just selling and holding large amount of things to control the market, large amount of material possession to control the market. They want to keep their profit at a minimum or at a reasonable amount so that they don't create this unbalanced system. Keep it in there. But for all of this, the Lord says he will bring them into judgment. In God's sight, such a man has made himself an outcast. He has sold his soul for that which he may lose at any time. He has worshipped an idol. Covetousness was his sin, and the means needed to bless humanity he has become to him the greatest curse. God does not design that men should appropriate all that the earth produces. So God does not design that men should appropriate all that the earth produces for their own selfish purposes. He calls upon them to bring their tithes and offering into his storehouse, that there may be meat in his house. In India, China, Russia, and the cities of America, thousands of men and women are dying of starvation. The moneyed men, because they have the power, control the market. They purchase at low rates all that they can obtain and then sell at greatly increased prices. This means starvation for the poorest classes and will result in a civil war. There will be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation. And at that time shall Michael stand, that great prince who is standing for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to the same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. So this is found in 5 Manuscript Release, page 305. Very important reading there. So if you look at this was written about 100 years ago. And if you look at what's going on right now, you see this same problem is there. And if you talk to most people who are who believe wholeheartedly in this false concept of, well, rich doesn't need to pay a certain amount of tax, and you need to lower the tax on the rich so they can keep more money. So the more money they can keep in their pocket, is the more they'll be able to create jobs because they're the jobs creator. Well, that's part of what's going on. The whole idea that a person can go and buy from poor farmers, poor producers, poor workers at a greatly reduced price, at the bargain price where they can hardly make a profit. And they can sell and make phenomenal money to most people who are basically want to be rich and covetous. They see that idea as great. They say, great, this is great. This is how America is supposed to be. This is how life's supposed to be. Because this is capitalism and this is a good thing. But what that does is that it creates a wicked system that might sound like, oh, the rich is working hard for it. No, the rich is fraudulent. Because what's really happening there is if you can buy such a greatly reduced price, and then you can take the product to market and sell it at a greatly increased price, you're making phenomenal profit while hurting the worker and the producer who is doing the farming and doing the production. And then now you say, well, you need to take now the profit from that. And this is what they do now. And they go to the politicians and say, hey, politician, what you need to do is make laws to make sure that I pay minimum taxes. So that means there's no proper investment from my point of view in education, in health, in infrastructure that will benefit the poor. And that same working person who I'm basically robbing, because basically they're buying it at cutthroat rates. That's normally how we say in business. So if you think about, you go to the average person in America, you say, hey, look, what do you think about the system? They say, that's great. That's what America makes America great. And that's what we need to do more. But as you do this, whether a person understands what's going on, you will find that the type of outbursts of violence that you see in Washington will increase because people who are desperate do crazy and desperate things. It's just the way things go. This is why so many foreign countries who have this massive gap between the rich and the poor are so unstable and they're so violent because desperate people do crazy, desperate things. So if you look at what she said here, she says India, China, Russia, and the cities of America, you have this problem. Now, you think about the countries today that have some of the most massive disparity between the rich and the poor. The weird thing about it is that the countries that she mentioned here are the countries to this day. China, Russia, America, and India has today the largest spread between the rich and the poor. These are the countries that keep the poor so poor and the rich so rich. If you're in Russia, they call it oligarchs. The Russians make sure of an oligarchic system where after the breakup of communism, those who are, I guess, close to the Kremlin and so forth, got all the money put into their bank accounts and all not even so much the money, but the industries. And they got to take over the industries, and now they are phenomenally wealthy, and they're creating a spread. But as the spread is created, the pastors are preaching it's good. So the pastors are saying it's good, and the politicians are being bought off. Russia has a problem. China has a problem. You think about India with the Dalits, the Indians that are so poor that they're living off almost nothing, while they have people who are multi-millionaires and billionaires living large. And how they're living large again? Because if you have somebody that can work for you for cents. I remember I was watching a documentary and this American says that it's okay to have people in foreign countries working for 10 cents an hour. So if you're making a product in a foreign countries for 10 cents an hour and you're free to pay these people whatever you want to pay them, and you can have them working for 10 cents an hour, and then you can turn around and you can sell the same product that they just made for $100, even if you have to pay for shipping and container to get the product back to America. And then you now make that type of massive profit and you say, oh, that's great. You say, I work hard for that money because I defrauded and stole from people and paid them 10 cents an hour. And it's legal. Then now you take the extra profit from that 10 cents an hour worker and you go to Congress and the senators and you pay them millions of dollars, or you pay somebody billions of dollars to win a seat in this Congress, win a seat in the Senate. And then you turn around now and you bribe them all the way through to make laws to make sure that you pay minimum tax. You're winning. Nobody can say that that's not the winner in life. that person is whipping everybody when they come onto the game of life, at least when they come onto material possession. And this is how stuff works in India, China, Russia, and in America. So now you're winning. Who's going to stop you? But the problem is, and this is to me where one of the things I've tried to explain to people, that in America we live in what you call a free society. It's not just freedom of speech, but it's the concept of freedom that goes deeper to the way people live. People just move around and do their thing, and there is no problem. But the problem you have, where most of these politicians and greedy rich people are not figuring out, is that that freedom is also a problem. Because again, if you look at what happened yesterday, people are making these rules that they don't, just skimming all the cream off the top for the rich and themselves. They're just going to be casual in the park playing, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, if I keep doing this, I need to have more security. Because I'm doing this, and so that they have to understand that I have to do this by force. I can't just freely do it and believe I'm going to be free. And this is where the problem goes. They're not thinking ahead that if you're going to be so greedy and so evil, it's important for you to have more security around you, because there's going to be people who are going to be against you. And you mark my word and watch what will happen and continue to develop in America. You'll find that as this continues, that the people who are going to be primarily upset with these politicians and these rich people are going to be primarily white males. Mark my word with that. And you're going to watch. It's going to be primarily them. And I've said this before. And the reason why, because if you deal with people who are, say, for instance, in the black community and the people in the Hispanic community, for the most part, they know how to get by with little. You know, the blacks has a history. So you think about blacks in America, they understand Jim Crow law. They lived through slavery, Jim Crow law. They lived through the crack epidemic. They lived through being, placed in the city and living in what you call, projects and stuff like that. So it's not like they have anything taken from them, because if you never had it, it's not taken. You're already down. You're used to it. That's just how it is. That's how America is. But the people, I believe, that are not used to living like this are people who are normally male whites, who are used to, having their bread butter on both sides. The system is geared for them to be rich. But as those who are elite, who have moved up and who don't see it like that anymore, they don't see it like we're all together. It's just, we're going to just take as much as we can, and you worry about your own. When they go into the situation where, because now we have the drug epidemic in the white community, we have the jobs going out, people losing jobs because the rich who control the means of production has moved the factories abroad and leave their own without jobs. Because remember, this was happening after the Civil Rights Acts to hurt the blacks. They moved the jobs in foreign countries. But now, the jobs now are leaving the white communities. The people who will be most hurt over this are the people who never had. The people who had. But if you never had it, it's not a problem. So you watch it. You've noticed most of the time. They always talk about sometimes even those who shoot in police. You look back and look at the record of those who are going in places, shooting up police, and you'll see that the number goes towards what I'm saying here. So, again, just really quickly before I go to some more Bible passages. So, it says here, the money men, those who have the means of production, those who, because, right now they try to make it, especially the rich, try to make it seem like what's destroying America and not making America great is too many foreigners. It's Hispanics coming in from the south of the border is destroying the great America, and we need to rebuild America by getting rid of the Mexicans and so forth. They say it's the black people taking on America. But you have to answer the question, how many blacks took businesses and sent it to foreign countries? How many blacks even own business and sent it to foreign countries? So how are you going to blame the Hispanics and the blacks for shipping business to foreign countries? But this is what the media, this is what the rich and the rich politicians have told their voters, that says, oh, your problem why you are unemployed and why you're not doing well as you used to and you don't have enough gravy is because of the poor people, the people who don't own the factories and businesses. They're the one that is the problem. As if the poor people are sending the jobs, the factories abroad. So they have not only skimming off the top all the cream, but they have figured out how to blame the poor. Remember in 2008 crash, they figured out how to blame the poor for the financial crash, as if the poor is in charge of Wall Street and as if the poor makes the financial rules. The financial rules are made by the rich inside of the United States and their workers, which is the Senate and the Congress, primarily the Senate. That's who made the rules. And anybody who's going to say anything else is just total ignorance of how the country works. So we're back here. The money men, because they have the power, control the market. Who can say this is not true? Who controls the market? Who controls the Chicago Mercantile Exchange? Who controls the Wall Street, the stock exchange? Is it the poor people? You know poor people that even have stocks? It's the rich people that control these things. And they control how the person who produce the food or make the product, how much money they get paid. And if you think about anybody who is a globalist, they control how people eat and how people sleep and how much money they have to buy food to put on their table. They're the one that control the cost of labor in various different countries. So they purchase at low rates all they can obtain and sell at greatly increased price. That's what control the value of products. You ask yourself the question, diamonds primarily are coming out of Africa. Who controls the diamonds in Africa? Who set the price? Why the price are at a certain price? Why is it that the price doesn't drop? Because somebody controls it. Somebody said, no, you only can take so much out. If you take too much out, you're going to put too much on the market, the price is going to drop. The diamond is not going to be as valuable. But who controls it? So people say, oh, no, they work for it. How they work for it? You go to a country, you slaughter a whole bunch of people, you take over their property, then you buy the gunpoint and by, threat of starvation, you have them go into mines, they mine the diamonds out. They mine the diamonds out, and then you say, I made all this profit. And then you say, we're not going to build schools for you guys. We're not going to build infrastructure for you guys. We're going to keep you guys poor. And then there's people who are intelligent who say, oh yeah, these, like the Bear family and all these various different family, the people who created the Rhodes scholarships, all these people, they work so hard for it. By blood, by destroying whole population, one of the poorest, one of the countries that has the biggest disparity of unemployment to unemployment is South Africa. It has to be kept like that to basically force people into those mines. You have to be desperate. And then the people doesn't get the cut of it. Remember, these are resources that men did not invent. These are resources that are not invented. These are resources that are put there by the creator God. That's why most of these rich believe that they evolved from a swamp or from a chimp. So if you look at this, you see this is what's going on. They buy as much as they can, because what you do, when you buy as much as you can, you control the market. And then now you can force the increase of the value of the product. So if you find out that there's a warehouse somewhere with some corn, you just go over there and buy that warehouse up for a cutthroat rate. Then you hold it. And then now when there's a supply issue on the market, because it's supply and demand. But you can control the supply and demand by basically holding. When you hold it, then the price go up and then you sell it for a phenomenal rate. You see the same thing with various different major department stores, like your Target or your Walmart. They'll go into a area, they'll put one of these big box store, and they'll reduce the price to cutthroat rates. They'll knock off as much stores are in the area. So when those stores close, then now they up their price. The people now in the community now, they got some benefit short term and they're like basically ant. They don't know what's going on. So they stop patronizing the smaller stores. They go out of business. Then now they're left with this big box store, Target, Walmart, whatever it is. And bam, the prices go through the roof. The prices go high. And now all these other stores were out of business, so the people are left now to buy at regular or higher rates. And that's phenomenal. Somebody say, applaud them. That's powerful business strategy. How many business person you're going to meet with a master's or PhD in business that would not say that's absolutely the way you do business? You destroy the competition. And then now, after they've destroyed the competition, they're making phenomenal money, and the people just have one store to go to. So other people are going to pay the true price because they could do that, because they could offset their loss because they have so many other stores. Then they take the phenomenal profit from that. They go to your congressperson, they go to the senator and say, make me a law to make sure that I don't pay hardly any taxes off this money. And then they laugh and say, we won. And it's true, they won. If you think about it, that's the way to do business. If you're just, there's no God, you evolve, you came from a chimp. Yep, there's actually no other way to do business. There's no body's not going to hold your account. And you can laugh. You can even laugh at people going to church and thinking they're praising God, not knowing that you have their pastors in your pocket also. You have the pastors control because the pastors love money. So you go to the pastors, you say, here's some money. The pastor say, I won't say nothing about that. I'll actually tell the members to live larger while they're broke as ever. So this reality here is how business is run. This is business 101. You basically decimate the competition and then you have control of the market. And so people say, oh no, they work hard for the money. Yeah, they work their head and then defraud the system for the money. And so as this increase, as I said before, you will see that those who will be most upset over a system like this is not those who live without. If you're used to eating, not used to, but if you know how to eat with just some ketchup and bread, toast the bread and you butter it with ketchup and that's your meal, you'll be like, that's the system. You know, I'm saying something here to some poor people. They'll be like, yeah, what's new? Give me something that's fresh. It doesn't matter. But the person is going to get more upset about it. It's that person who he thinks that says, look, I'm not supposed to be treated like that. These people are not doing me right. And I would say you're going to watch and see that it's them that's going to be most upset when it comes on to these things. The regular people will be like, yeah, what's new? That's how they do their business. That's their system. Remember, they gave us slavery and Jim Crow law, and they keep us out of certain businesses and certain ways of making money. We can't do corporations because we have to do business with them anyhow, so we get crushed. So what's the big deal? But when the people, or as I say, conservative white males, or white males who are supposed to be at the top, they're part of the cream, loses, they now become violent. And as we notice, it was them, like your Timothy McVeigh, it's your James, this guy here that did the killing, it's them that most naturally get upset and they be like, I don't like the system is wicked. And this system is hurting. Now, people might believe that when somebody like, say, myself talk about the problem with the rich skimming most of the cream off the top, they might think, so are you for wealth redistribution? No, I'm for sense. I'm not for wealth redistribution. I'm for sense. If a person is making money cutthroat rates and they want the government to put in infrastructure to get to their stadium and all these things, I think reasonably they should pay a higher amount of taxes, because in order to build their massive factories and so forth, you need infrastructure. And so if you're taking the taxpayers' money to basically be able to make phenomenal money, if you're going into towns and cities and states and you're getting tax breaks and years of tax-free money making opportunities, then when you're making profit and you're profitable, it should be fair for you to pay a higher rate of tax. I don't know why somebody with two neurons working would not figure that out and say, yeah, that makes sense. But now what they have sold the general American public is that although I had all this money, you think about it, Tesla right now, whatever his name is, Elon Musk, is going to build some major factories. You can't build factories like that without major infrastructure and major tax break from the American government and from the state that you're working with. People like that doesn't deal on a local level. They deal on a state level. Well, if you're going to deal on a state level and you're going to make all this phenomenal profit, it should be reasonable to think that when you're profitable, that you should be paying a higher percentage of tax. You're just paying back what was given to you. I think that's fair. But what the rich has inculcated in the people, that they are worth it and they deserve it and they work for it. How can a person be a billionaire and tell me that they work for that by themselves? They were the only person going to work every day and earn $1 billion. They had to have so many people around them and so many incentives and stuff like that from the government for them to make it. So James speaks about this, that in the last day, this is going to be a major problem. And that God will judge these evildoers for doing this. Because greed is the issue. They're covetous. And don't care about their fellow human being. James 5 verse 1 through 6 says, Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl, for your miseries shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and your silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days. So notice here James is talking about what will go on in America in the last days and in places like China and Russia. And we can see this literally happening. Starving millions in Russia, in India and in China. And yet, there's people that live in so large, and most of the money they have, they will never be able to use it. They just hoard up in banks, sitting there. And the Bible says gaining rust, but it's not a physical rust it's gaining. It's a moral rust. It's corrupt. Because again, there's people who could have gotten that money. The Bible's going to explain next. The Bible's not talking about leeches. This is not a false narrative they give in America. They say, oh yeah, these people are leeches. They're calling them workers leeches. That's going to backfire on them. Look at this, verse 4. Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, cried. And the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth, the Lord that gave rest. Remember, one of the evils of Egypt is that Egypt says, I will not give. The Pharaoh said, I will not give the people rest. As a matter of fact, make them work harder. So what I understand as we move towards the end of time is that the rich moneyed men will do everything to make the people's life harder while they have millions and billions of dollars sitting in bank accounts. This is what will happen. And this will not stop. No matter what the people do, they're wasting their time. The laws that are being crafted in America right now, and the sermons that are primarily being preached on TV, are geared towards making the few at the top become just more phenomenal and wealthy than they are. It will not stop. God is the only one that will have to step in and deal with this thing in some very vicious ways. Look, notice in verse 4 it says, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your field. The people who are being defrauded are people who are working for these men. So instead of paying somebody 10 cents an hour, they could have simply paid some of these workers 25 cents an hour. How 25 cents an hour paying a worker is going to hurt the billions that these people are making? It just tells you how corrupt and cruel they are. How is this? How is paying somebody who reap your field? Think about it. The people that are being hurt the most right now are the people that are literally picking the fruits and the vegetables to put food on our table. And the rich basically saying, keep them illegal so that we don't have to pay them no money. It's people who are working, but yet they go in the media and they talk about it as if, oh no, the problem is not the people working, the problem is people leeching off the system. But here the Bible says, those who are being hurt, those who could get a little bit more, just to keep them happy and keep them working, are the people working for these greedy people. And then make sure they pass laws to make sure that they have no path to citizenship, to make sure that they just keep reaping. In the New King James Version, it read the verse 4, those who mow down your field. You think again, it goes to the poorer class of workers. Instead of just paying them just enough to keep them happy, they're going to be greedy and be like, nope, we ain't going to pay them. As a matter of fact, what we're going to do is not going to just pay you guys. We're going to take the factories and we're going to ship them abroad and pay those people even worse, just enough that they can have food. And then we're going to say, oh, we work for the money. We earn it fair and square, while they're just defrauding their fellow human beings. So, You have kept back by fraud. Fraud is I could pay you $12 an hour, but I pay you $8 an hour. Fraud is I could pay you, if you're illegal now in America, I could pay you $8 an hour, but I pay you $6 an hour or $4 an hour because you're illegal. That's kept back by fraud. So the extra $4 you could pay the person, whatever scenario, you keep it in your pocket. Now, if you have 1,000 people working for you, or if you have 100 people working for you, that's a lot of money to keep in your pocket. What are they going to do with it? They can't use it because they're making too much money. So what they do with the money, they just have it sitting in banks. While the workers have to go without, while the kids have to go without, while the workers can't have insurance. Look at all these big conglomerates with this massive amount of income that has their workers can't have a little health insurance, because the health insurance is going to cut into their profit, because the more profitable they are is the more they are applauded by their fellow citizens as being great men of the earth. This is a problem. So one of the things I wanted to share, and it's kind of slipped me here, but if you know something I shared in the past, and that's why I wasn't too keen on sharing it again, but you know what it is. So if you look at this, it says the top corporate CEO earns as much as much in a year as 10,000 garment factory workers in Bangladesh. So you look at the income of a CEO, corporate CEO in America. And you look at the top ones, so probably the Fortune 100, Fortune 500 CEOs, and look at their income. And their income is the total of 10,000. They make as much as 10,000 garment workers. So imagine factories after factories with people toil away, working, in many times horrible conditions, sweating, putting in 8, 10, 12 hours a day. And when 10,000 of them finish a year, there's this one person who made as much as them. 10,000 people. One person. And somebody say, oh, he earned it. And then that one CEO now is going to go to these charity events with politicians when they're running for Senate or for Congress. And they're going to dump now all that money on them to make sure that they pass laws that they get even pay out less tax. And this is the system that we have. So 10,000 to 1. And then now if you say now to that corporate CEO, say, why would it hurt you and your investors? Because it's not just him. He's representing his greedy investors. Why wouldn't you guys just say, instead of saying 10,000 workers, make it be that the corporate CEO get paid similar to 5,000 workers, to double the people pay. Let them be able to go home and smile and not just be able to work in the factory and just can put food on the table and pay their bills barely. Let them go home and they can say, this month we can actually buy something extra for our children. And they will like, but no, we ain't doing that. As a matter of fact, we're going to go back to Congress and we're going to say, what you need to do, Congress, or what you need to do is pass more laws so that just pay less taxes so we can put more money in the bank. Why? There's no reasonable answer. I've never heard. As I say, I've read, I've listened to seminar, I've watched some of these guys talk. I don't get the reason why. If any of you can tell me what's the reason why, you inbox me. I'd like to know, what's the point of being so greedy? To die, leave billions of dollars in the bank. What's the point? When that money could make workers happier who are working. We're not talking about people who are, living off the system from handouts. But you go to America and you try today, you're at work today, go to somebody, ask them, what do you think about redistribution of wealth? And they start to blab in their mouth. But it's not about redistribution of wealth, it's about paying workers a decent salary. But yet they have this false narrative that you can't even have a conversation with them because they're just quick to say, oh, you're talking about redistribution of wealth. Well, how was that wealth gain? If you gain the wealth by fraud, how is that redistribution? If you got tax breaks and incentive to make the money, how is that redistribution? How is it about paying your fair share? But this will not always be. And this is why the Lord here promises that he will deal with this thing, and it will be that way, because the problem is that the more you create this environment, as I said earlier, the more what we'll have is simply a recurring and issuing of what happened in France. But things are of such political divide that you can have a sensible conversation with the rich. Now you have noticed, and I'll bring this thought here, how that you have noticed that more and more recently, that you have more and more CEOs type people, people are multimillionaires. More and more you have it that they're signing on this thing where I think it started with Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, where they plan to give away half of their wealth to philanthropic organization. And without going into detail or into type of analysis of that concept, but more and more some of the rich are realizing, when I die and I'm going to leave all these billions of dollars, what's the point? Might as well do something to bless humanity. And I don't know exactly how they're going to redistribute their wealth, or they're going to give away some of their monies. But many of them are signed on, many of the billionaires, not many, but some of the billionaires have signed on to giving away half of their wealth before they die, instead of passing it on. And some people have noted that most of the people who are signing on are people who made money in their life, not people who inherited it. Because as you know, most of the inherited money just passes on from generation to generation. And then what that does, it creates a concentration of wealth, which is not a good thing, because it will continue to foment violence, because you have more and more, everything that you buy, you're supporting one group of people. So anyhow, you have this thing now where people, like as I say, some of the billionaires, especially those who seem to come into the money and made it in their lifetime, want to give back some to bless society. We know that this can be tricky, because we know in the case of like Bill Gates, that some of the money he gave, he probably gave it, some of it was given to corporations that makes drugs, and the drugs that were made were basically used to send drugs to Africa, but also he invested in the drug companies that he was giving the money to. So some of it can get very murky. But I understand the concept that they're putting forward. But it's something to watch as we go forward. Because the reason is that some people in the money class are seeing that what they're doing and what their fellow, greedy people are doing is basically creating a system where there's a point where, as I say, where the 26 people that sit on President Trump's cabinet, they're worth more than 100 million people in the United States. The 100 million poorest people in the United States is worth less than the 26 people sitting on President Trump's cabinet. And I know people say, well, he still hasn't assembled, I think, his old cabinet yet, or something like that. But whatever, he had a assembly in the beginning. Those 26 people, when they sit at the seat, they collectively are worth more than 100 million people, the first 100 million poorest people in America. So you have just a few people holding such large reserves of money, and and assets and so forth. And as they do this, what will happen is that they're there now to pass rules. And if you look at all the rules that they have talked about passing, there are rules that will cut the tax for the rich, make sure that the rich pay less into the system. And as they do that, as you know, this will create problems. And this is where most people are not understanding that this concept here of keep talking about don't redistribute the wealth. Sure, don't redistribute wealth. Let the rich keep all their money. Let them get all the tax break. Let them pay lower tax rates than everybody else in the society. Great. But what you'll do is you will redo France. And what end up happening in France is that they foment violence. And that's what the Bible predict will happen. And literally, that's what will happen as we see this thing play out. So expect more, because the greedy is in charge and they're basically passing the rules, because, again, the Senate and the Congress are multimillionaires, and we'll see this get worse and worse. Let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, we thank thee for the blessings of your word. We thank thee for the blessings of this day. Pray that you may be with us, dear Lord, as we go through the rest of this day. May you bless all those who are here. May you guide us, dear Lord, how best to take care of our own finances. that we may not fall prey to the evils that are in our society. Be with us, dear Father, we pray for Christ's sake. Amen. Thanks for being with me here on Revive Reform Radio. Looking forward to talking to you tomorrow morning, where we should talk about wisdom for living. Until then, I pray that you may come to walk with the King.